So here we have a common calculus problem, specifically a common mean value theorem problem, and it says a driver on the interstate handed in a ticket at a checkpoint that indicated he covered 225 miles in 3 hours. The interstate has a speed limit of 65 miles per hour. Should the driver be ticketed? So we can use the mean value theorem on this problem. However, we should establish a few givens before we begin, which will help us clear some of the initial steps up when we actually begin the calculus part of the problem. So the first given is A, which we can establish as our starting point, because we know in any mean value theorem problem we need both a starting point and an endpoint. So in this instance, our starting point will be 0 hours. Our endpoint will be 3 hours. S of A will be 0 miles because he started with no miles, and S of B will be 220 miles because, or excuse me, 225 miles because he ended his travels covering 225 miles. Now, we need to determine that we can in fact use the mean value theorem by making several assumptions. We know that this is a real-world experience, so there were no instantaneous stops or immediate reversals anywhere on the highway. It was a smooth flow of traffic, or so we can assume. So we know, assuming that S of t is continuous on the interval 0 to 3 and differentiable on the interval 0 to 3, then by the mean value theorem there exists a value C such that S of C equals S of B minus S of A over B minus A. So we have our initial assumptions that allow for us to justify using the mean value theorem, and we have our formula written, so we can go ahead and plug in our givens to the formula. So S of C equals S of B, we've determined to be 225 miles an hour. S of A, of course, is the starting point, so it's 0 miles. I'm sorry, this is not miles an hour, this is just miles. Over B minus A, so B is our endpoint in relation to time, which is 3 hours, and of course the starting point is going to be 0 hours. So S of C equals 225 over 3, which, as we continue our math, is equivalent to 75 miles per hour, because the unit on the numerator is going to be miles, and the unit on the denominator is going to be hours. So this gives us the speed the driver was going at point C. So, of course, 75 miles an hour is in fact over the speed limit of 65 miles an hour. So yes, the driver should be ticketed for speeding. Why? Because according to the mean value theorem, which we've employed here, the driver was in fact going at least 75, or was going 75 miles per hour at point C between the intervals A and B, which is between the time of 0 hours and the time of 3 hours, which is the total length of his travels on an interstate that had a speed limit of 65 miles per hour, justifying a ticket.